Chris, thank you everybody for joining today. Before we do get started to the NFT bridging conversation, I just want to put a big disclaimer, huge red banner that we are hiring. So if you go to the Arbitrum Twitter profile page, you'll see a link there to apply. As we go through the conversation, just keep that in mind, as we talk about NFTs and bridging. So before we get started,
it's not a red banner; it's a green banner. It's a blue banner. How about that?
Yeah, it's got to be a blue banner. You're right. I don't know why I said
red. Red sounds bad. Yeah.
Yeah. Great way to start things off. So I'm joined here today by, of course, Harry, the CTO and co-founder of Off-Chain Labs, the company, of course, behind Arbitrum, as well as the two software engineers, Daniel and Fred, who are also behind the magic of Arbitrum as well. So yes. Before we do kind of kick it off to you guys, just to give some background here a little bit, as most people know, NFTs as they currently exist are pretty much like stationed at the layer that they're at. So if you have NFTs on Ethereum, for the most part, they're only on Ethereum. If you have NFTs on Arbitrum, then your small brains, for example, they're only going to be on Arbitrum. So the topic we're exploring today is potentially having the ability to somehow bridge, probably most likely from L1 to L2, and kind of just exploring the intricacies of that, the problems, and maybe some solutions behind those problems. So yeah, if you want, Daniel, Harry, Fred, when you guys can go ahead and kick it off, just can we touch on like some interesting questions and issues that currently are preventing this from happening at the moment?
I can start it off. Yeah, feel free to. Sorry, Fred, do you want to start?
I was gonna just start with a very simple question, like, Daniel, why can't I just transfer my NFT to Arbitrum? Like, I have my NFT, I can transfer it. Like, why can't I do it to Arbitrum?
Right. Good question, Fred. I'm surprised you don't know. So it's so that is the key question. What does it take to have an NFT bridge? And I guess the short answer, scratch that. There won't be a short answer, but the answer is there are a number of ways of doing this, right? So we currently have an ERC20 token bridge where you can move assets between Ethereum and Arbitrum. And there's a number of ways that we could do a similar thing for NFTs. And so in other words, the challenges here are not so much technical. We know how to do those things. We could do them. Obviously, we don't want to get it audited and so on. Part of the thing is there's these open questions as to sort of what we want this NFT bridge to be, and I guess more particularly what we want to optimize for. I think the sort of thinking about it, and we've had a number of we've had some discussions and done some research on this, and I think like it kind of comes down to three questions or three sort of three axes on which you might want to optimize, let's say. So one is what are the things you want out of an NFT bridge? Well, one thing is you could optimize for fees, particularly the fees it takes to, let's say, deposit, particularly, and withdraw and finalize a withdrawal. And this is important because when you're bridging stuff, you are directly interacting with layer one, and users want lower fees. Okay, so you could come up with designs that really just optimize for fees. There's optimizing for, let's just call it compatibility with stuff, with tooling, with pre-existing user interfaces and things like that. So like essentially making developers' lives easier, maybe. There's that. And then there's the third one, which is this more general question of like, what exactly is it? What is it you want out of an NFT bridge? What is it that users are going to want to do with it? What is it that app developers want to want this thing to do? And then depending on the answer there, depending on what the priorities are, we would sort of build things kind of differently. Yeah, I mean that was pretty broad. We can zero in on some of those, but that's like I said, there's all sorts of designs out there, and indeed there are NFT bridges across multiple chains currently do exist. We haven't put one out, although we do have one on our Rinkeby testnet actually. We just haven't done one live, and there's this question of if we commit to here's the canonical Ethereum to Arbitrum NFT bridge, then we are setting some standard, and we don't want to set the wrong standard basically.
That sounds like
this is like kind of just to like this is like kind of I think a nice place to like zoom out slightly, just to like extend on what Daniel you were saying, which is basically like why not just like try it out? Why not just like, deploy, pick a design, deploy it, just do 3 different designs, deploy them all. And basically the reason is like, it's like this weird, interesting situation we're in with like kind of like this sort of just building a fresh ecosystem, and like kind of where basically choices made now are going to have major effects for like years and years and years to come. Like standards kind of like somebody's going to deploy something, everyone's going to start using it, and then like kind of migrating from that point to something new is basically impossible because of kind of network effects and lock-in and kind of what have you. And so it's a point where you really want to kind of think about a lot what you're doing, because like, yes, it'd be awesome to have it like live right now, but like, it's also important to kind of, be building towards a world where we're going to be really happy with how things are set up a year from now, or 10 years from now. So it
like,
kind of pays to think about it.
It's like accidentally setting a standard when it's like not actually like fully fleshed out and I guess adequate for the future of integrations or with DeFi and other NFT projects, right?
100%. And there's a funny nuance that goes into this, because we can't predict everything that will happen in the future and all that. But at the same time, we don't want the standard to have like an inherent race condition that's attached to it, right? So there's also like dosing around this.
Yeah. And like one example of a place where like I'm really happy basically like that we used kind of our power of setting new standards is, and I'm gonna deviate from the topic of NFTs to talk about fungible tokens for a second, is with our ERC20 bridge. We were really excited to get to do this thing, which was to have kind of try to create a standard on Arbitrum of ERC20 tokens having kind of better, more standard capabilities than they do on Ethereum. So like having the ability to do this permit interface, which is kind of a great thing for UX, where on Ethereum, basically you have to kind of shoot for the lowest common denominator of interfaces that tokens support, which means you don't get any of the cool fancy new features that people have figured out in the sort of many years since the ERC20 standard kind of emerged. Whereas on Arbitrum, you can assume kind of a way more featureful set of tokens that you're interacting with. And so kind of there's a lot of kind of parallel thought on the NFT side of like what would be kind of the best NFT world.
The question then, in that case, then are there any things that we know, or at least like for the most part, without a shadow of a doubt, like probably like will be needed by NFT projects or devs looking to bridge their projects over from an L1 to an L2, like attributes, etc.
Well, it's a good question, but it's not easy to answer. I mean, so to again, if we sort of compare it to the ERC20 bridge, for example, even with what Harry just said there, right? So we have like we decided, okay, this is going to be through our canonical bridge. We decided that like the standard ERC20 will have this have these nice additional features where you can basically do this callback hook sort of thing. So with an NFT bridge, and by standard, I mean sort of you can take any ERC20 on Ethereum and you can just bridge it over to Arbitrum. And like if it's not already there, you'll just sort of get this new L2 representation of it that will be by default this standard that we picked. So there's sort of 2 questions already here in the NFT world. A, what would the equivalent standard be? Do we want it to actually just be the minimum thing that conforms to the 721 standard? The answer to that is definitely just no. You at least want to add some features there because there's some things about, I think everyone would agree that there's some just like blatantly missing aspects to the 721 standard. Checking for your full balance of tokens, for example, there's just like some very silly things. But yeah, what exactly would that be? Do we go full 1155? Do we, I don't know, right? Do we include the stuff that's not really part of the standard, but effectively has become like metadata, which I think we should just talk more about that soon. But then there's also the general question of, do we even want a standard ERC7 or a standard NFT template, right? Or should it just be more, and this goes to the question of how projects are actually going to use this thing. Is it the case that like I, as a user, just want to be able to take my crypto coven and move it to Arbitrum and do stuff with it? Maybe, but that's like also that use case is more pronounced and obvious for tokens, right? Arbitrum has DeFi stuff, it has AMMs, and it's like, okay, whatever token, I want to be able to trade it. for NFTs, it's not as obvious that that's the most useful thing. And it might be more useful to just say, like, whatever project that wants to do this bridging stuff, they kind of set up their own contract with their own needs. So already there's that question mark of, do we want, let's call it a standard path. I lost your
That's true
there, Hunter, but yeah.
Well, I'll complement that goes full circle to the question of it. That is kind of like, well, there are many things we can try to predict, but what we do know is we know certain things that people love about NFTs, right? People love holding their NFTs. People love getting airdrops like loot on top of their NFTs. People who create NFTs love their royalties. They're just to introduce a few of the questions that come around here. And these are all different things you can optimize for. And there's a huge trade-off space of all of this.
Yeah. And the kind of, maybe let's the metadata questions maybe a good inroad here, because I think there's kind of this, like, the question of what it means to deposit an NFT into a layer 2 is kind of it's kind of a metaphysical question in a way. And what I mean by that absurd statement is, when it comes to, not to keep bringing it back to fungible tokens, but I think it's a good point of comparison, the sort of bare minimum of what it means to deposit a token onto Arbitrum is pretty clear, right? It's like, I want to be able to escrow my token on L1. I get this, you can think of it as a synthetic representation of this token on Arbitrum. That token, let's just say, maybe it looks and feels a lot like an ERC20. I can trade it around, but like, the key guarantee is that the rightful owner will indeed be able to withdraw it back to layer 1, okay? And like, beyond that, you can add more features, as we said, but like, it's clear that that bare minimum is kind of enough. Whereas with an NFT, okay, we need that bare minimum too. In other words, the rightful owner of this NFT on Arbitrum that's been deposited from layer 1 should be able to withdraw it, of course. That's like what it means to be a bridge. But because of the nature of NFTs, because these are not fungible things, they're unique assets, they like very often have other stuff associated with them, like this metadata thing. So
I love that you mentioned that. Let me just jump in for a second,
please.
Because I'd argue, and that's something we'll get into like later on this. I'd argue that you actually don't need to withdraw. You don't need to withdraw. You need to be able to withdraw, but specifically with NFTs, you don't actually need to withdraw.
So that's not where I thought you were going. Why don't you explain more?
No, I'll leave this for later. Just planting the seed. We'll come back to it.
I'm just glad. So it took us 14 minutes to.
Get rugged.
You got muted, Harry.
Harry, you got rugged at a funny time.
Oh wow, yeah, that's weird. I was just, it took us 14 minutes to get into an ontological debate of the nature of an NFT.
Yeah, yeah. This is how most of our calls go. Okay.
But it's a really interesting question, and it's one of I think the core, the slightly more like practical way that I look at it is kind of provenance. Like, what's, and this is like on Ethereum, this shows up as like, I can deploy my own NFT. Right. I can deploy my own NFT contract and just copy paste, the art from some other NFT. It's not the same thing. But like on when you're in L2, you are sort of like in a lot of ways kind of copying and pasting the information about the NFT from Ethereum onto that layer 2. And I keep getting muted. This is very annoying. And so like, doing that in a way that kind of is authentic, that is not just kind of a copy paste and a duplicate, but like is kind of seen as the true asset is interesting.
Yeah, I keep getting muted too. I don't know what's going on here, but
I swear I'm not trolling you guys, but I heard the connection dropped for a few people. So maybe if you could reiterate that, Harry.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just like watching my phone, watching for it to get muted and like trying to unmute it immediately. Yeah, basically just this kind of general question of like, kind of with NFTs, like you have, there's an image, but what that image is, it's linked to an ID, a token and an ID on chain. And, generally speaking, for most collections, there's like a single contract that represents kind of the whole collection, and the let's say the profile pictures are each kind of a token. God damn it. Are each a token ID. And so basically sort of, copying and pasting, it's not about just the metadata, it's about the combination of kind of the metadata and the fact that it's kind of that one true authentic. I can't just deploy my own CryptoPunks and like have it be as legit as the real CryptoPunks. But when we talk about kind of bridging to layer 2, in a lot of ways, kind of, you are just copying the data, or kind of, what does it mean to kind of move that to a whole different blockchain when it's actually an asset that is Ethereum native?
Right. Because like technically speaking, like, it's funny, I was talking to Daniel about this the other day. Like the word bridge isn't really a good representation of what's actually going on. Like, aren't you technically like locking, or in practice, what would probably happen is you'd probably be locking the NFT, let's say on layer one in some sort of smart contract, and you'd be having like a wrapped version on layer two that would be acting as it. And then if, so let's say you sold it to someone else and someone else buys it, that person would be able to go ahead and unlock the actual version on L1 if the time came.
Yeah, I think
So
that's
it's not really bridging per se, right?
I think that's effectively right. Fred may have some whoop. Okay, I'll just keep my finger over the mute button. And okay, yeah. So I think that's basically the idea. And then there's this question of like, yeah, this wrapped version of your token, or this synthetic version of the token, what exactly does it include? And like, a reason you might want to literally push the metadata up is, again, this might just be easier for compatibility with a pre-existing user interface of an exchange, right? That exchanges are already designed, so they they say like, okay, this NFT is on this layer. We check that current layer for a metadata hash. We hit IFPS to find whatever image of a pixelated monkey or whatever. But of course, in practice, as Harry was saying, you already have provenance, right? You know that this NFT came from layer one, so in principle, like you can just query that some other. In principle, you can query that some other way and save the user the hassle of like literally having to pay the fees to push this metadata up. So again, I think part of this is just a trade-off of ease of use for developers versus fees. Yeah.
It's funny because there's even something else that goes into this. It was something that actually blew my mind once I saw it because I just hadn't realized. Metadata are primarily consumed off-chain, and you have some projects that do, for example, generative art and all that. And they do something very sneaky. And what they do is the metadata parts, they just generate it, but they never consume it on chain. And they actually use like gas that is above the gas limit for that. So you could actually argue that there are some NFTs that are unbridgeable if you actually want to copy the metadata.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I would argue that like the hash thing, it's essentially, I think Vitalik he did a post on NFT bridging, he called it a meaning hash. And like basically the idea, I think, literally enough content that you could, let's say, like decode it and reconstruct whatever it is, the actual is sort of an unnecessary gimmick. Like as long as that hash can represent the data in some way, it's effectively the same. But yeah, in any case, that's like, yeah.
Except guaranteed data availability, which is a thing that we we talk a lot about in the roll-up space.
Yes, although as long right, okay, fair enough, right. So you're saying guaranteeing the data availability of this off-chain content. Yes, this is true.
I mean, unless you're saying that data availability is not important.
Whoa, we're not saying that.
Well, to be honest, when you're doing bridging, you're looking for a key property, right? You're not trying to make the NFT safer or the token safer. You're trying to make it just as safe. And for example, you could have the metadata hash, or you could have just a pointer back to the original metadata. And that way, it's kind of like you're saying, don't ask me for the metadata, ask someone else. And you have some standards that are coming around for like off-chain data retrieval, or to just look somewhere else, or just using some kind of like IPOD pointer, something like that. There are many different approaches you can use here as well, that it's kind of like saying, I'm not responsible for this metadata, ask someone else.
Yeah, I think that sort of like opens up this kind of general idea that I think is really important. It's going to become really important, which is sort of awareness of the fact that we're in sort of a multi-chain ecosystem where the ideal.
Actually, if you want, we can kind of steer the conversation a little bit that way. Kind of, Harry, you're talking about even like some of this like cross-chain stuff. Because I think it's like coming from a person who I got a bunch of NFTs. I don't have the most, but I got a bunch of them. I could see people wanting to bridge NFTs, not so much because they want to be able to sell it on another chain because the fees are cheaper or anything like that. I could see it more for like the idea of interoperability with other NFT projects on different chains. You know what I mean? Like the ability to somehow, like, let's say, have a Bored Ape, for example, interact with like a Small Brains, like on their metaverse, or something like that, where it's like it's more so than just the buying and selling aspect. It's more so like the actual like kind of gamification of the NFT. It could add a whole new dimension if you can bridge it over and all of a sudden use your crypto tokens, as you mentioned earlier, let's say, as a piece of the puzzle in like a metaverse game.
So do we want to build a rocket to bring the apes to the moon is the question.
There you go.
That's going to happen anyway. So glad you mentioned that.
and give them all small brains. Yeah. I mean, I think this sort of gets to the question of how will projects really use this. And my sense so far, I mean, we've been talking to projects about this and gotten some feedback. Although I see people in the space listening who I would love to hear feedback from. So take notes and give us feedback on this general question. But yeah, this is like, if you're a project and you're planning on deploying, your NFT is not live yet, or maybe it's already live on Ethereum, or maybe it's already live on Arbitrum and Arbitrum native. Like, what is the cross-chain thing you want to be able to do? And my guess is for most of them, they will have like specific functionality in mind, like whatever it is. Like, let's say, I don't want to name a specific one because it'll sound like I'm spreading rumors or something, but, NFT project X that exists on Ethereum layer 1, they're like, hey, we want to do something on Arbitrum. They're going to want to sort of decide what that contract is on Arbitrum, right? Whether they have the ability to mint so that they can control whatever. In which case, yeah, this just plays into the design, right? It won't just be, as opposed to having some standard
sort of way,
yeah.
Maybe it...
No, go ahead. I'm babbling.
You cut off there for a second. I think that's why.
No. My bad.
So in a way, kind of what you were saying, Daniel, like, it almost would make more sense for there not to be a generalized NFT bridge, but more so like a bridge for like projects if they choose to bridge their NFTs. I mean, like, would that make more sense, like the grand scheme of things? Like, do we want people to like be bridging, like, let's say, like, like, for example, like out of like a 10K project, like 1 or 2 people bridge it over to Arbitrum or any other chain for that matter, and kind of do it that way?
Yeah, I mean, the way that we've sort of done our best to get the best of both worlds with ERC20 token bridges, it's inevitable, it's going to keep coming up, is we have this default path that I mentioned, and that's just what we call one of the gateways. But then there's like these other gateways that you can build. So if you have a token that like the interactions between Ethereum and Arbitrum are something specific and special, you kind of give it its own, you go through like the custom gateway or give it a special gateway to handle that. So the difference here might just be like everything that wants to bridge goes through its own gateway. And every NFT that wants to bridge goes through its own gateway. There's no standard path because like that's just kind of niche and will make things more confusing. And then now projects can sort of handle things as they see fit. There's a lot of messy details there that I'm hand-waving over, but that is one way of doing things. And yeah, again, it just comes down to this question of what is it projects want, and how much demand is there for a random NFT on L1 to be just bridged to layer 2 and have some like standard representation.
There's another side to this as well. That is kind of like, there's what projects want, but there's also what users want, right? And yes, the users are the ones who own their NFTs. So it's pretty cool to give them the option. If they want to send them across and like sell it on the treasure marketplace or whatever, like, why can't we let them? And I think the biggest problem is when stuff breaks, and sometimes it breaks badly, sometimes it doesn't. And can we find a middle ground where it's fine? And for example, there's a space for the users to transition into like this new NFT that is sponsored, to this new like way of bridging that is sponsored by the team itself, to have all the features that are needed. And yeah, there are many different approaches here as well.
And actually, I should also mention too, like, it's like they're like unknown unknowns. I'm sure people have brought that up before, where it's like for example, you bridge over an NFT. I know I said earlier, like, people may not necessarily do it, but I'm sure people will do it anyways. Like, let's say they bridge over an ape and they want to sell it on like a marketplace on Arbitrum. On OpenSea, which is probably where the generalized marketplace for apes are, a cut of that sale goes to the people who pretty much made the contract, Yuga Labs, whatever. But if you sell it on Arbitrum, there is no kind of automated system to give them that royalty. You know what I mean? So how do we approach that situation? Like royalties in secondary marketplaces and things kind of connecting back to the devs essentially.
Yeah, well, I mean, the truth, like the dirty secret about royalty, it's not really a dirty secret, but the truth about royalties is you can't really enforce them. You can't really truly enforce them on the NFT token contract level ever, because of the ability to, basically because of things like Arbitrum, right? Or other ways of wrapping a token, right? If you want the ability to transfer ownership, you can always do that by sort of wrapping it, effectively transferring ownership, and sort of bypassing like any sort of inline royalty in the NFT contract itself. I believe when it comes to royalties, these typically are enforced like at the exchange level, which of course on Arbitrum an exchange can do whatever. But yes, I mean this is just another aspect, right? This is another feature NFTs have that are like effectively built in. That what the the best way to do things there is not self-evident. Yeah.
One like potentially one sort of interesting thing there is, I know there's been at least I've seen, I mean this is an area where a lot of other people know way more about than I do, but I know one of the sort of general pushes was towards an idea of kind of non-mandatory royalty like a non-mandatory royalty standard, where basically kind of it was easy to track basically if there was a royalty charge that was intended to be paid without actually kind of enforcing it, which because of this fact that sort of it can be bypassed, and kind of that then gives you sort of much more ability to at least say hey, you can tell that this token, that there's a royalty requested kind of for this NFT in layer 1. Please abide by the same in layer 2.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like, another way to just put that is effectively like royalties are always going to reduce to a social contract anyway. So yeah, some standard to just like make that social contract very concrete and very auditable, where we can sort of see anyone bypassing it, and then I don't know, publicly shame them, whatever. Is something we can do, but that applies equally to layer 1 and wrapping tokens versus bridging them to layer 2, Arbitrum native. So that's not I don't see that as a unique problem to NFT bridging. So that doesn't worry me. So that's solved. We solved that one.
But it does wrap back into like this kind of general concept, is at least to me like kind of in the, what when you look at an Ethereum NFT that's been bridged to Arbitrum, the world that I would really like to see is where kind of the main thing you do is it says, hey, I am this Ethereum NFT and here's the proof, and you can verify that. And then, as a user looking at that NFT, you then go head over to Ethereum and pull up all the data about it from there. Because essentially, like, you're never going to be able to kind of in a general way capture all of the information about that NFT from Ethereum. You can do your best. You can kind of try to capture as much as possible, but like there's too much uniqueness there to really kind of get that perfectly done, as opposed to just sort of like having it become standard. Like, well, if I'm looking at an NFT that's like not on kind of the chain where it was minted, I'm going to kind of, in this idea of sort of standard bridging, the thing I'm going to do universally is look back to where it came from and get the information from there.
So we can break down this idea of bridging like into two main things then, at least in my opinion. One side is this right to redeem, this original one, and the other side is a compatibility layer, right? And these are two separate things that you can like try to tackle.
Yeah,
and optimize
100%.
with it.
Exactly. And to Harry's point, it is just, it is just intrinsically impossible to truly capture compatibility, because how do you even know what that means in the general case? By the way, it's really great when Twitter Spaces work. This is so nice. I'm not getting muted. I can just speak. But yeah, so like that one, because there's truly no actual general way to capture it, I think nicely enough doing what is the more sane thing anyway, of just saying layer 1 or just whatever, some chain represents the provenance, client sides can query for whatever data that way. And then we don't have to pay these ridiculous fees of trying to copy everything over. That kind of makes sense. So yeah, that's cool. Now the other thing, which I said earlier was like the absolute bare minimum, which is sort of, let's call it the withdrawal guarantee, or the ability to settle back on the provenance chain, I see as fundamental. Fred, you gave a cryptic comment earlier about how maybe you don't need to be able to withdraw. Should we start on, this is going to get wonky, I can feel it, but
we promised ourselves that we would hold off getting like too wonky for at least the first half hour. So,
exactly.
we're now past the first half hour, so people can buckle up.
That's right.
If you made it here, now you're in for the alpha. Now's the real stuff.
So Fred, what did you want?
My IQ is growing.
Yeah. You're officially no longer a small brain. Fred,
So
yeah.
So it was very subtle in terms of wording what I meant there, and I fully agree with you. That is, you need to know you will be able to redeem in the future, but you actually never need to actually do a withdrawal, even if you're going back to the original provenance chain in certain schemes. And of course, it ends up going this like trade-off space between compatibility and provenance. And as long as you're keeping this provenance, I'd argue that you never need to actually go back and touch the original NFT again.
So what is the situation in which you said even if you go back to the original chain is what I think I heard you say. So what is the situation where I don't do a withdrawal, but I still can
So
go
the
back
thing
to
is,
the original?
sometimes you have certain asymmetries in terms of cost, right? And when you're setting up the codes or just like inherent to the protocol, it's at least in most optimistic rollups and just ZK as well, it's much cheaper to do it with a deposit than actually a withdrawal. Like in terms of like just the interfaces of an L1 to L2 transaction is usually cheaper than an L2 to L1.
Mm-hmm.
So you can always just get around this. And instead of actually doing a withdrawal, you just do a deposit again, but on the opposite direction. It's kind of like if you have two bridges. That was kind of what I was getting at. And a bit later on, we can talk about a few different ways of doing this, which are pretty cool.
Well, there's a really cool one. Maybe let's just get into it now. We warned people this would get wonky, but I mean, there was a design. Sorry,
Daniel,
go ahead.
am I the only one who's thinking of like the diamond NFT now?
God.
Yes, you're the only
one.
Oh my
God.
What?
Like if I destroy the original, but now have like the meaning and uniqueness and rights of the original kind of transferred to me in some way, does it matter that I can't get the original back?
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to say yes, it does matter, but yes, I also see your point. There's a like sidechain type of design in Bitcoin world that literally just involves the way you deposit is you burn coins, which is kind of similar, and then you just get this vague representation of like quote unquote Bitcoin on an L2. I mean, that to me seems kind of insane, but I see where you're going. That is not what I had in mind, though. What I had in mind, and where I think Fred's going with this, so there was one of the designs that we toyed with, and I think Fred himself thought of it. I mean, I believe with this design, it makes like, so going back to like, what do we optimize for? What do we care about? Let's just pretend we have a blank slate to start with. There's no ecosystem already. There's no tooling. There's no other projects that have already built interfaces. We're just trying to optimize for fees, which is to say low fees for users. I believe, at least when it comes to deposits, this design is as cheap, literally as cheap as NFT deposits could possibly get. And it's a crazy design, but do you want to, I mean, I can describe it if you want, or Fred, if I don't want to steal your thunder, if you sort of see where I'm going.
No, go for it. I think you'll describe it better than me.
Okay, you'll definitely describe it better. But basically, I mean, so the idea of this flow, I'll bury the lead a little bit, but the way it works on the L2 side is you kind of, you have this like factory contract where you can sort of effectively mint an NFT token, right? And when you mint it, you're effectively claiming this represents X token on layer 1, right? And the idea is if and when you want to trigger a withdraw, then and only then does on layer 1 a sort of mini contract get deployed that lets you claim this token. So the burying the lead part, the first step of that is literally the way you deposit is you transfer your NFT to an address, which if you just look at the address, there's nothing there. There's no contract, it's just blank. But what's actually happening there is you're sending it to an address, which is sort of, deterministically calculated via some create2 magic that kind of will later be the one at which the withdrawal contract gets deployed.
Just to put a bit of context here, I think you're doing a great job explaining. But the key thing here is you're doing a commitment, right? On the L2 side, you're committing to certain information. And on the L1 side, you're also committing to certain information. And on each side, you commit in a different way. On the L2 side, you commit to it by asking the factory to mint you an NFT. And when you do that, you're saying like, here's the information I'm committing to, that I'm the one who's minting. I'm minting this NFT, and this NFT will be at that address. And then at the L1 side, you're committing to a similar information. You're saying, I'm the one who's going to mint it on the L2. It's going to be this NFT, and then you transfer it to this address. But the difference is how this commitment is generated on the L1. Because when you're doing a create2 to deploy a contract, you can have this arbitrary salt, like a bytes 32 value. And then it can be like, you can lazily evaluate this. I'm throwing too many buzz terms around. Let me stop myself. But yeah, you have this commitment. And the idea is that the deposit You just need to create this commitment on the L1, which is just transferring to a create to address. And then the only time this commitment gets actually evaluated and checked is when you eventually do the withdrawal.
Yeah, I was going to throw in one more buzzwordy term, which is like essentially the withdrawal. What ends up being the withdrawal address on L1 is kind of counterfactually instantiated, right? So it initially doesn't exist, but you have this guarantee that it can and will eventually. So yeah, this is like, I mean, I think this is maybe the most fee optimized NFT bridge that at least we could come up with. And this is, I mean, I like this example, A, because it's just really cool. But it's also an example of where, yeah, like concretely, I guess depending on what metaphysical assumptions you're willing to make, concretely, this gives you like bare minimum NFT bridging functionality. And again, if we were just like starting from a blank slate ecosystem, maybe this would be the best way to do it. But if you actually play through what this would look like to actually deploy now, there's so many steps of this that are like nuts. Like, namely, for the first part, like the way you deposit, we just say, hey, send your NFT to this address. And, you know, so if you're just like looking at a block explorer, it just really, really looks like we're scamming you, because we're like, here's an address, there's nothing there. We promise that by doing this, you effectively have your NFT on layer 2. So like, probably just off the top of my head, we would want some block explorer buy-in where they could at least like do this create to thing and let you know, like, yes, indeed, you're sending it to the right address. Then on layer 2, anyone can just like hit this factory contract and make a bunch of these, you know, synthetic NFTs on layer 2. And each of them are claiming, yes, I am that Bored Ape, or I am that crypto coven. And it's like, from a client side perspective, you can easily verify them. But if everyone doesn't already have this tooling, and if everyone hasn't bought into this tooling, there's like so many steps along this path that are just look so weird to users. And like, you know, a malicious party could deliberately try to confuse you. So this is like, yeah, an important point on the design space.
It's even more than tooling support, and it gets to like some really kind of weird fundamental questions about like what do you need? Like this property where basically like now no longer is sort of an NFT, would a kind of bridged NFT be a thing that says I control ownership of this L1 token and you can just trust me on that. Now in this system, it would instead basically be something that says, hey, you know, I'm claiming that you know I control this NFT on Ethereum, but you have no reason to trust me. So kind of go and do your own research.
Yeah.
Which is very different. And like, for instance, like smart contracts interacting with these things then have no way of kind of verifying their authenticity. The authenticity could only be verified off chain.
That is true. That is one concrete difference, which is like, for example, not true of our canonical token bridge architecture. Because like, ERC20 token bridge architecture. Because currently, like, part of what the bridge does is maintains this mapping. So like, of like layer 1 address to layer 2 address. So yes, yes, what you said is right. On L2, you can't do on-chain verification of provenance. You can only do it kind of off-chain and client side, which could itself be a downside. But I think this is definitely the coolest design. If we were just like building the NFT bridge to like do something other engineers thought was neat, this is probably what we would do. But that's not the primary goal generally anyway. So yeah. So, and I mean, there's other like less weird versions of this. Like another consideration that I guess this would be true of the protocol we just described. But more generally, it's worth just like saying explicitly, you know, with NFTs, there's a bit more freedom in terms of, again, let's just assume for a second, all we care about is I have, withdrawal guarantees. And we're not worrying about bringing any other data with us. There's a bit more freedom with NFTs than with fungible tokens here in how you represent it, right? Because the very sort of organic and natural way to represent fungible tokens is like on L2, it looks a lot like tokens on L1. You have an L2 token contract that if there's whatever uni exists on layer 1, you have like the standard uni L2 contract. Whereas with non-fungible tokens, because like they are even a collection of whatever crypto covens are not fungible with each other in any meaningful way. You could, for example, have each one represented as like a little one of one NFT contract, which is, I think, what the version we just described would look something like that. I mean, hell, you could even go in the other direction and just be like, if you're using the NFT bridge, it is maybe a single contract, right? So it's like a single 721 or 721-ish thing that just like has a bunch of tokens, and yeah, it's up to the client side. Like Harry said, it's like, do your own research, you figure out which token this represents from layer 1. So yeah, there's that design space, and yeah, again, it's the same thing, right? If you want to lean into compatibility with tooling and also like compatibility with mental models, so people can reason about this clearly, you'd probably do like contract per asset. Compatibility with tooling, same thing. But if you don't care about that, yeah, you can optimize in those other directions.
And also, just to throw another like random weird idea, for example, what you can send over is you can just copy the code. For example, if it's a self-contained NFT that all the code is in one contract, doesn't need to compose, well, you can just copy the code and send it over. But that would be too expensive. So you can do some fancier stuff as well. You can just send over, for example, the hash of the code, and someone can redeploy and prove that that's.
But like, I mean, the high level general question that this like raises is a pretty interesting one, and it's one that's like kind of about how NFTs are used, which is sort of there's I imagine, roughly speaking, you could kind of split NFTs up into two camps. One where sort of the NFT is like purely sort of off chain, is purely, I mean, or like the data, maybe like the data's on chain, but like kind of it's just a it is a token with like no other sort of like logic or power surrounding it, that kind of has this whatever sort of qualities imbued in it via an image, audio, video, what have you, or something non-media, whatever it is. But essentially it's kind of that basically the blockchain is just being used for kind of tracking ownership of this asset, and kind of not that much else, versus kind of NFTs that are much more sort of integrated. So it kind of where there's a lot of sort of actual smart contract logic that depends on kind of whatever various qualities of the NFT exist, where sort of it's much harder to kind of do a one size fits all in any way when there's kind of such an arbitrarily large amount of customization possible.
Yeah, which is why it's important. Like that's why we're not an NFT project, so that's why we really want to like just sort of get a sense of what are the expectations of how these things be used. Yeah, I mean, one other weird thing I'll just throw out there as far as the design space goes is given that it's often true in NFT projects that there is an admin with minting rights, like even on the layer one side. One thing that could potentially be kind of nice, although it doesn't really make that fundamental of a difference, but in the case of Token Bridge, in the case of a ERC20 bridge, you're kind of like escrowing and minting when you deposit, and then you withdraw, you're burning and releasing from escrow. Yeah. So you're escrowing on L1, minting on L2 as a deposit, burning on L2, releasing from escrow on L1 as a withdrawal. I just had to say it twice to make sure I said it right. But like one thing that you could potentially do with NFTs, at least if there's already this kind of admin minting rights granted, is you can kind of like burn and mint on both ends. So now you have like the total supply, instead of having to reason about like, okay, it's escrowed over here and there's a synthetic representation over here. The total supply is in fact like the total supply across all of the chains that it lives on. And this would involve sort of like perhaps some security assumptions there where, if it's on this layer 2, you're sort of effectively assuming that layer 2's security holds so that no unauthorized mints happen. But if you're willing to make that assumption, yeah, that's another thing we've toyed with. Not really related. I just wanted to throw in more weird things.
To kind of like kind of like wrap it up a little bit. I should also actually, before I even say this, a shout out one project, Composable Finance and Treasure. They've actually teamed up together to actually have their own bridge, where Treasure was able to bridge over some of their treasures from Ethereum L1 to Arbitrum L2. So I just had to give them a little shout out there. But we did mention earlier, I think it was Daniel, you who mentioned it, that we have our own kind of NFT bridge working on testnet right now. Can you kind of maybe like talk a little bit about like what was put into that, and maybe what we first thought about putting into that bridge that we wanted to make sure it was on there, or
before we even go over to that, I think there's like an even more sort of like higher level interesting question, which is like why are we doing anything about like why are we involved at all in sort of in kind of talking about like how, like in deciding or in talking about how NFTs should be handled in terms of bridging here, and kind of the answer is basically that the reason we're talking about it is because we think it's important, that like kind of all of the sort of bridging protocols are built on top of this sort of underlying mechanism that Arbitrum provides for sending cross-chain transactions. And so like in no way are we in sort of any special position from kind of a technical point of view to sort of, you know, settle how NFTs get bridged to Arbitrum. When we're building something, we're just building it using the same permissionless capabilities that anybody could build. So the reason why kind of we're wading in here is basically kind of much more social coordination than it is technical. We really, really want to see a vibrant NFT ecosystem. And so, you know, we want to see, and you know, we want to see a vibrant, and I think one part of kind of having a vibrant ecosystem is having it be like not overly confusing. Um, and so basically, like our main kind of, you know, position in this is we want people to be able to bridge NFTs, and because we think it's, you know, really, you know, a really powerful thing to support, and we want to sort of, you know, have an ecosystem that is relatively cohesive so that it does not get incredibly complicated.
Yeah. And
Sorry for
basically,
that, by the way.
yeah, and that's an important point that we just sort of like, you know, yeah, we sort of bypassed over. But yeah, this is everything we've talked about is effectively application level. Like none of the designs we mentioned require any Arbitrum protocol changes or anything like that. In fact, someone could take notes on this call and just build everything we did. I don't know if you should do that, but you could. And you know, with the ERC20 bridge, we, you know, the same applies there, right? Our canonical quote unquote ERC20 bridge is just an application with like some smart contracts on Ethereum and some smart contracts on Arbitrum that just leverages Arbitrum's message passing system. In that case, you know, we wanted to go live with a token bridge. We wanted to be a bit opinionated about like just making it nice. I mean, that's a whole other topic that we won't get into, but we wanted to avoid certain confusing cases basically there. I think also it was easier to reason about, you know, because yeah, there's fewer open questions when it comes to fungible tokens, I guess. At least in our minds there was, and yeah, we wanted to just avoid a bunch of like asset fragmentation and things like that. But so yeah, so we put that up. But yeah, still our token bridge is just an application. We encourage people to use it, but other bridges can and indeed do exist. And yeah, for this one, we want to like take a step back a bit more, and yeah, just sort of like hear people's thoughts and hear projects' thoughts, and there's no reason we should be the ones who like unilaterally set these standards. So yeah,
We hand this off to the community with open arms.
that's right.
But
An open eye.
I don't know if there was anything we wanted to say before we end it off here, like on the bridging note. If not, I can kind of close it out.
I mean, just, you know, a general call to action to anybody who like, you know, finds this stuff interesting and wants to talk more. We definitely, yeah, like this is something that kind of has long-term consequences and is, you know, I think really, really important. And so kind of having as many, you know, interested people and stakeholders involved as possible is kind of, you know, I think really, really valuable. And, you know, that could come from like, you know, you know, in any way that it comes. It could, you know, come, you know, very super interested in anybody who like is, you know, active in the NFT ecosystem at all, and super interested in basically anything, you know, both externally and, you know, and then also like if anybody, you know, really wants to dive into this and is looking to be very busy, we are very actively hiring. So if you want to kind of be on the inside working on these questions, you should very much reach out about that.
Yes, it's something that like through this entire conversation, you're like giddy and you're just like, you know, shivering with excitement. Then you probably want to look at the hiring button.
Yeah, if you even made it this far, we probably want to talk to you. Let's put it that way.
200 people in the call, by the way.
Listen, that's a lot of people.
Including my dad. Can we hire him?
Yes.
Depends. Does he hold NFTs?
Exactly. You sold the right ones. Yeah. So you guys already know. If you aren't already, make sure to join our Discord. Obviously, you're following us on Twitter at this point. But yeah, feel free to get in touch with us, whether it be via Discord or the lever link in our Twitter bio. And yeah, we appreciate you guys for stopping by today and listening to us ramble about NFTs and bridging.
And if there are other like kind of general topic areas related to kind of layer 2 that you want to hear about, definitely we're looking to do more of these. And we can talk about things endlessly. So
Yeah,
exactly.
and we'll do more where we like take questions and stuff. So yeah, keep a lookout.
All right, guys, have a good one.
Thanks for joining, and Hunter, thanks for hosting.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you guys for talking.
All
Good
right.
bridging.
Have a good one.
Happy bridging.
Happy bridging.